Hello everyone, and welcome back to Scary Interesting. In this video, we're going to look at 3 incredibly disturbing pieces of surveillance footage showing the last time people were seen alive. One of these clips is among the most infamous in true crime history. Another is as frustrating as it gets. And the final one precedes one of the worst possible things that can happen to a person. So although the events in this video are fleeting and non-descriptive, they are still highly disturbing. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Intro music. On the morning of July 8, 2014, security footage at Varna Airport in Bulgaria captured something so bizarre it would soon become one of the internet's most enduring mysteries. A young German man named Lars Mittank, dressed casually in a yellow t-shirt and shorts, suddenly sprinted from the airport's medical office. Without his bags, passport, or even his phone, he tore down the terminal, pushed through a set of sliding doors, and then slowed to an uneasy jog. Other cameras picked him up outside, where he climbed a tall fence, dashed through a field of sunflowers, and disappeared into the forest beyond. He left everything he owned behind in what looked like a panic. And that was the last confirmed sighting of him. The footage is so strange and chilling that Lars became known as the most famous missing person on YouTube. Before his name was tied to the mystery, though, Lars lived a life that didn't make headlines. Born February 9, 1986, in Berlin, he grew up in a quiet town and rarely strayed far from it. Family and friends described him as normal, average in the best way. He had a steady job at a power plant, a tight circle of friends, and a girlfriend. He kept close ties to his parents. After his father suffered a stroke, Lars stepped in to help run the household. His mother, Sandra, was especially close to him, and that bond would prove crucial in the days leading up to his disappearance. At nearly 6 feet tall, with dark blonde hair and weighing around 187 pounds, Lars looked like any healthy young man. His only distinguishing mark was a small scar on his left forearm. Nothing in his work, relationships, or personality hinted at what awaited him in the summer of 2014 in Bulgaria. In late June of that year, Lars set out on his first ever trip outside Germany. He was 28 and traveling with 5 friends to Golden Sands, a resort town on Bulgaria's Black Sea coast, often compared to Ibiza. For most of the trip, Lars seemed like himself, lounging on the beach, swimming in the pool, playing football, and going out at night. Nothing seemed off until the very end of the holiday. On July 6th, the night before their scheduled flight home, the group went out drinking at a bar. Lars got into an argument with other German tourists over football. He was a loyal fan of SV Werder Bremen. The others supported Bayern Munich. It started as sports banter but almost escalated to blows. Eventually, Lars parted ways with his friends outside a restaurant and didn't rejoin them for the rest of the night. When his friends returned to the hotel hours later, Lars still wasn't back. They finally saw him early the next morning, and he looked shaken. He claimed he'd been attacked by 4 men he believed had been paid by the Bayern fans from the bar. He said they beat him on the way back to the hotel. His jaw hurt, his ear throbbed, his hearing was off. The injuries were real. A local doctor diagnosed him with a ruptured eardrum and a damaged jaw. The doctor advised him not to fly. Air pressure could make the ear injury worse, and prescribed an antibiotic called cefprozil. He also recommended a hospital visit, but Lars refused further treatment. His friends offered to stay behind until he could safely fly, but Lars insisted they go home as planned. So on July 7th, while they boarded their flight, Lars checked out of the resort and into a cheaper hotel closer to the airport, saying he'd be fine on his own. In hindsight, that decision marked the beginning of his unraveling. Unlike the bustling resort, the new hotel was tucked away in a rougher part of Varna. That night, for reasons we still don't fully understand, Lars's behavior changed abruptly and dramatically. He called his mother several times. She described his voice as fearful. He asked her to cancel his credit card, worried it had been copied at check-in. He whispered during parts of their conversations as if someone might be listening. He said 4 strange men were following him. In a text, he called the hotel strange and said he didn't feel safe in Bulgaria at all. CCTV inside the hotel showed him pacing nervously through halls, peering out windows, even hiding in the elevator. He looked like someone being hunted, though no one else appeared on camera. Around 1 a.m., he slipped out of the hotel, only to return an hour later. Where he went during that time remains unknown. By morning, his paranoia had deepened. On the phone with Sandra again, Lars said the people chasing him were getting closer. Desperate to get him home, Sandra booked him a flight for that afternoon and even bought a backup bus ticket. She wired him about £500 for expenses, but he never withdrew the money. Whatever was going on in his mind, it was about to reach a breaking point. On July 8th, Lars arrived at Varna Airport by taxi, carrying only a backpack and a small travel bag. He texted his mother that he'd arrived safely. For a moment, it looked like the ordeal might be over. Before boarding, though, he went to see the airport doctor. His ear still worried him, and he wanted another opinion. The doctor later described him as nervous and erratic, asking repeated questions about the antibiotics. The doctor reassured him he was fine to fly. Lars seemed unconvinced. Then, in the middle of the consultation, a construction worker entered the office, routine business, given the airport renovations. To Lars, it was too much. He froze, began trembling, then leapt to his feet and shouted, "I don't want to die here. I have to get out of here." He bolted from the office, leaving everything behind. That's when security cameras caught him sprinting through the terminal toward the exit. Moments later, he vanished from the airport's view and was never seen again. In the years since, countless theories have tried to explain what pushed a healthy 28-year-old to abandon everything and run into the unknown. Some point to the attack days earlier. A ruptured eardrum can cause severe pain and disorientation. He might have had a concussion. Doctors have suggested possible brain trauma leading to confusion and paranoia. Others point to cefprozil. Rare, but documented psychiatric side effects include hallucinations, paranoia, even psychosis. But according to his friends and the airport doctor, Lars was suspicious of the medication and hadn't actually taken it. He never even filled the prescription. Another explanation is a pre-existing mental illness, though his mother insists he had no psychiatric history. Still, stress and injury can trigger an acute psychotic episode, something a few experts believe happened. A sudden break that convinced him he was being hunted. Not all theories point inward. Some believe his own words, that he was being followed. Could the men from the bar have sent someone after him? Or was he pulled into something darker, like a local criminal group? Police have found no evidence linking Lars to organized crime, but the possibility of foul play lingers. There's also the idea that Lars wanted to disappear, that he staged erratic behavior to throw people off and start a new life. Sandra rejects this outright. They were far too close, she says, for him to vanish voluntarily. The truth is, nobody knows whether Lars's fears were delusions, or whether someone really was after him. After he sprinted out of Varna Airport and into the fields, the official trail went cold almost immediately. Police searched the area. Nothing. It was as if he evaporated into the summer air. Sandra refused to accept that. She hired a private investigator who combed hospitals, checked records for unidentified patients, and chased every lead. The result was the same. Nothing. Weeks turned into months. Months into years. No developments. Lars's disappearance might have remained another unsolved missing person case, if not for the cameras. The footage of him running through the airport was replayed endlessly, dissected frame by millions online. By 2018, it had been viewed more than 16 million times, cementing Lars as the most famous missing person on YouTube. The original clip showing him sprinting into the fields has since been deleted, but by then, the images were burned into the internet's memory. As of this recording, the case remains unsolved. In the early hours of September 9, 2017, hotel cameras at the Crowne Plaza Chicago O'Hare captured a young woman stumbling alone through its hallways. She bumped into walls, swayed with each step, and looked like she was searching for something she couldn't find. At 3:20 a.m., she appeared near the front desk, leaning on anything within reach just to stay upright. Moments later, another camera picked her up exiting an elevator at a lower floor. Finally, at 3:32 a.m., the last image of her life was recorded as she pushed through the doors of the hotel's kitchen and disappeared around a corner. Before the headlines, the speculation, and the endless loops online, Kenika was a typical 19-year-old from Chicago. She lived with her mother. Friends described her as fun and loyal. Family remembered her wide, magnetic smile and a protective streak for the people she loved. She still leaned on her mom, but she was beginning to carve out her own path. On the night of September 8th, Kenika borrowed her mother's car, said she was meeting friends, and left home around 11:30 p.m. Like most parents of teenagers, her mom felt that balance between concern and trust. Old enough to go out, but you hope they'll be careful. The plan was a party in room 926 of a nearby hotel. By the time Kenika arrived just after 1 a.m., about 30 people were crammed into the room. Music, drinks, nothing remarkable from the outside. But people who knew Kenika noticed she wasn't acting like herself. An acquaintance later said she looked unsteady. When she hugged him, it felt less like a greeting and more like she needed help to balance. Others remembered her sipping cognac and insisted she didn't take anything stronger. Still, something was off. She danced for a bit, then withdrew and sat alone, looking sad and detached. At 1:30 a.m., she had her last phone call with her sister. It was quick and ordinary, nothing to suggest trouble. After that, she and her friends left the room and were spotted in a hallway. Not long after, they became separated. By around 4 a.m., the party was winding down, and her friends realized she was missing. They called her mother using Kenika's phone, which she'd left behind. For her mother, it was every parent's nightmare. She jumped in the car and drove straight to the hotel, arriving at 5:30 a.m. She begged hotel staff to help her search. She wanted them to check the security cameras. If Kenika had wandered off, the footage would show it. Management told her they couldn't release, or even review, the recordings unless police were involved. So she paced the lobby where her daughter had vanished, knowing the answers might already be on tape. At 7:14 a.m., she called the Rosemont police. Instead of springing into action, they suggested she wait a few hours. Young adults who go missing often turn up on their own. Without police involvement, the hotel still refused to look at the cameras. She was forced to wait. With every hour, Kenika seemed to slip further out of reach. By midday, worry gave way to desperation. At 12:46 p.m., Kenika's older sister filed a formal missing person report that police finally accepted. At 1:15 p.m., Rosemont police notified the hotel that Kenika was officially missing. Even then, the urgency wasn't what her family hoped for. They refused to sit idle. With little progress since the report, the family and partygoers started knocking on guest room doors, floor by floor, asking strangers if they'd seen her. A hotel employee eventually called 911 to report the disturbance. It wasn't until 10 p.m. on September 9th that police finally reviewed the surveillance footage in earnest. There she was, stumbling through hallways, exiting elevators, and wandering into the kitchen. Just after midnight on September 10th, a hotel employee found her. At 12:25 a.m., nearly a full day after she was last seen alive, Kenika's body was discovered inside a walk-in freezer in an unused kitchen area. She was lying on her side, face down, missing one shoe. The freezer temperature hovered around 34 degrees Fahrenheit, about 1 degree Celsius, cold enough to sap her strength and her life in just a few hours. First responders pronounced her dead at 12:48 a.m. For her mother, who had pleaded for help since sunrise, the news was shattering. All the waiting, searching, and begging to review the footage ended with the worst possible outcome. After the discovery of her body, the official investigation moved quickly. On October 6th, the medical examiner ruled the death a tragic accident. The cause, hypothermia. Toxicology showed a blood alcohol level of 0.112, above the legal driving limit and enough to explain her stumbling. There was also a prescription medication in her system used to treat epilepsy and migraines. Kenika hadn't been prescribed it. Mixed with alcohol, it can intensify disorientation. Enough, investigators said, to leave her unable to recognize danger or find her way back out once the freezer door closed. Police echoed the conclusion, a tragic accident. But the official line didn't quiet the storm. On social media, theories exploded. Some insisted she'd been set up by friends whose stories didn't line up. Others believed the hotel was hiding something, pointing to the delayed access to surveillance footage as proof of a cover-up. For her mother, the outrage wasn't about conspiracy. It was about negligence. She had arrived within hours, begging staff to check the cameras. She called police early and was told to wait, and when the footage was finally reviewed, it showed exactly what happened. She filed a lawsuit against the hotel, its security company, and the restaurant leasing the unused kitchen. She argued that all three failed her daughter, the hotel for not acting sooner, security for not intervening, and the restaurant for leaving a powered freezer accessible in an unused space. The legal battle stretched for years. In 2023, a settlement was reached. Her mother was awarded roughly $6.4 million. Cortland, Mississippi, is the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. With a population of around 500, the gas station on Highway 51 is one of the few hubs where people cross paths daily. You can't walk in for a drink without bumping into someone who knows your name, your family, and probably what you had for dinner. That's why the night of December 6, 2014 felt so eerie. Surveillance cameras at the gas station captured a familiar sight. 19-year-old Jessica pulling in to fuel her 2005 Kia Rio. Petite, barely over 90 pounds. With a bright personality, Jessica was well known around town. The footage shows her walking toward the store and pausing when someone off-camera catches her attention. Moments later, another angle shows a man in a striped shirt filling a gas can. When he finished, he walked off in the same direction Jessica had gone. The cameras never captured them together, but the timing would soon be impossible to ignore. Jessica eventually comes back into frame, returns to her car, and finishes pumping gas. She climbs back into the Kia and drives away. On the surface, it's totally normal. Less than 90 minutes later, firefighters find that same car engulfed in flames on a back road not even a mile away. For first responders, the call sounded routine: a vehicle fire. They rushed to the scene expecting to battle a blaze and file a report. What they found instead is something you can't prepare for. As they worked to control the flames, a figure emerged from the darkness. A young woman stumbling toward them in nothing but underwear, body covered in horrific burns. Her hair was singed away, skin charred, and still she moved, clinging to life, begging for help. That woman was Jessica. Later reports would confirm that 98% of her body had been burned. She was rushed to a nearby hospital and then airlifted to Memphis. Doctors fought to save her, but the damage was too severe. Jessica died the next morning. For those on scene, the image of her walking down the road, barely recognizable yet still alive, would never fade. With her death came the beginning of a mystery that would grip her small town and eventually the nation. To understand the shock, you need to understand who Jessica was and where she came from. Cortland was her entire world. She lived with her mother across the street from her grandmother. Her father and stepmother lived just down the road. Tiny like her town, she made up for what she lacked in size with spirit. Outgoing, athletic, stubborn. She'd played softball and cheered at South Panola High. Like many teens, she flirted with risky circles, dabbling in drugs, running with people tied to gangs. In Panola County, where violence sometimes reached even the smallest corners, it wasn't unusual for young people to brush up against trouble. Still, most who knew her remember her warmth and ambition, and that's exactly what made her violent death so hard to reconcile. Investigators pieced together parts of Jessica's final evening, but much remains a blank. The gas station footage provided a window into her movements. After that, the trail grows hazy. At some point after a phone call with her mother around 7 p.m., Jessica's car ended up on a remote stretch of road near the station. Firefighters later testified that when they arrived, Jessica was walking toward them. Staggering, burned, but alive. In those moments, she reportedly repeated a name, trying to tell rescuers who had done this to her. That name, depending on who you asked, sounded like Eric or maybe Derek. An autopsy would later confirm the horror. Nearly her entire body burned. Early reports suggested an accelerant might have been poured down her throat. That detail was later walked back, but the brutality was undeniable. Whoever did this wanted Jessica destroyed. From the start, the case was bigger than a small-town crime. Investigators knocked on doors, combed alibis, and pulled phone records. They sifted through more than 1,000 numbers and interviewed at least 150 people. One possibility, her boyfriend, incarcerated at the time, had orchestrated it. That lead fizzled. Others suspected gang involvement. Local gang members publicly offered condolences. Unusual if they were involved, investigators said. Even the man in the striped shirt seen filling a gas can was identified and cleared. That left the most important clue. Jessica's own words. Who was Eric or Derek? The problem? Cortland wasn't short on Erics or Dereks. Investigators chased down each one and came up empty. For more than a year, leads went nowhere. Then, in February 2016, authorities announced a breakthrough. The arrest of a 27-year-old named Quentin. He knew Jessica. By most accounts, they were friends. He also wasn't a stranger to law enforcement. 3 prior convictions in Panola County for 2 burglaries and fleeing police. He'd been released from prison just 2 months before Jessica was killed. Suspicion grew when investigators learned Quentin had deleted his texts and call history with Jessica. When pressed, he said he didn't want a dead person's information sitting on his phone. An explanation that only raised more questions. The arrest followed an exhaustive probe that stretched far beyond Mississippi, with leads as far as Iowa and Tennessee. The evidence, largely circumstantial, was enough to bring charges. Later, authorities in Louisiana identified him as the prime suspect in another killing, the 2015 torture and stabbing of a 34-year-old international graduate student, allegedly for her debit card PIN. The brutality of that case deepened suspicion. But charging him was one thing. Convicting him was another. In 2017, the first trial ended in a mistrial. Jurors deliberated for hours, even announced a verdict at one point, but couldn't agree when polled individually. A second trial in 2018 played out the same way. Prosecutors leaned on cell phone data, placing his phone near Jessica the night she was attacked. They highlighted his deleted messages and inconsistent statements. But without physical evidence tying him directly to the crime, the defense hammered the gaps. The biggest, Jessica's final words. First responders swore she said, Eric or Derek. Quentin was neither. When the second jury deadlocked, another mistrial was declared. Prosecutors ultimately chose not to seek a third trial. For all the time, money, and effort, the state couldn't close the case. Nearly a decade later, Jessica's death still hangs over Cortland and the state of Mississippi as one of the region's most baffling unsolved cases. If you made it this far, thanks so much for watching. If you have a story suggestion, feel free to submit it using the form in the description. And if you want to support the channel, consider joining the Patreon or becoming a channel member here on YouTube. Anyway, thanks again, and hopefully, I'll see you in the next one.